Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, Associate Editor of Audioholics, and I'm here with...
Rob H. This is AV Rant, the show where we answer your questions about home theater and all things audio-video. And we have kind of a cool announcement to start off this episode. Do we not?
I don't know which of our many cool announcements we might have. One of them is that I got a light so that now I'm easier to see.
That wasn't quite the one I had in mind.
Oh, okay. Was it that somebody, you got some love from your brony bros? Is that the cool announcement right there? That after I mocked you for being a brony, that you now have brony friends on the podcast? Is that the cool announcement?
Now I'm in trouble because if I say that I'm not a brony, then the brony fans are going to be angry at me, and if I say that I am a brony, then I'm a brony. So I'm in a no man's land. I've stuck myself in a horrible position.
I have honestly not watched that cartoon specifically because I love cartoons, and I'll probably like it, and then I don't know what I'd do with myself. I have started watching Bob's Burgers.
Yes, that's a great show.
On the Netflix. I just finished all 3 seasons that are on Netflix, and that is fan-freaking-tastic. My mom likes it. She's like, why is that little... Everybody who sees that show walks in the room and goes, why is that little girl wearing bunny ears? I'm like, because she's a sociopath. That's why.
No reason.
Like. Okay. Love that show.
Yes.
Yes, but we do have a cool announcement, and our cool announcement is that we finished our podcast interview with Chris over at Odyssey. So Chris Kirikakis, whatever, something like that.
Pretty close.
Anyways, I'll never get that name right. That's a hard name. But he was a great guy. I have to apologize when you hear the interview. You'll hear that we kind of went straight into the technical stuff, and we didn't start off with what is Odyssey. So I pulled it back about 3 questions in and said, let's talk about what Odyssey is. So I apologize for that. That was my.
I was worried about time, and we still went over time, like you could sort of expect from us at this point. So yeah,
it was about like an hour and 15 minutes, something like that. Ish. That's not too bad for us. So great interview, lots of really good information about Odyssey, a lot of things that I was actually surprised of about. Like there's going to be information you're going to hear, and some of it actually contradicts stuff that we've said. But a lot of it confirms what we said. So it's going to be very, very interesting for you guys to hear. So look forward to that. I'll put that out sometime probably this week or next. And that'll be a really cool interview for you guys to hear. Let's see here. Well, I guess first of all, let's do some listeners of the week. We've got 2 listeners of the week this week. We've got Todd. I think it's Todd J. Yes, Todd J. Is our one of our listeners of the week, and the other one is Niels, and Niels is one of Rob's brony bros. Brony bros. So
Lord help us if this actually ends up becoming a thing on the podcast. That was not my intention.
It's okay, man. I mean, I like all kinds of weird stuff, so I don't really judge anybody for I have no place to judge somebody for liking something weird. Like I can't get into a conversation with somebody and not have to like go through that mental thing like. How are they going to take the fact that I think subwoofers are the coolest thing ever, or how are they going to like the fact that I'm really into, that I watch a lot of anime, or what are they going to think about this, or what are they going to think about that? So I don't even judge. I actually started researching how to make some like cosplay stuff recently because I was laid up and I had nothing better to do, and I was like, I always wanted to make like a really cool cosplay outfit to go to like CES or. Not CES, what is it, Comic-Con or something like that.
Sure.
So I kind of thought it was kind of weird to begin with, but then I went to the Tampa Comic-Con and was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. And everybody's kind of cool with it, and it ends up being a cool thing to do for like Halloween stuff too. So I got no cause to judge. So anyways, Niels and Todd are our listeners of the week. To become our listeners of the week by going to the website, www.avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Coffee link. Rob doesn't actually drink coffee, but Rob is a kind of fuddy-duddy stick-in-the-mud kind of guy when it comes to that stuff. But then again, he's a brony, so what are you going to do? And he clicked on they clicked on that and left us a little PayPal donation. And that helps support the podcast, keeps us going, keeps us in the black. And, for our hosting and stuff like that. And it's just a great way to make sure that this podcast continues on. That being said, there's tons of ways to support the podcast, and if you let us know that you have supported the podcast in one of these ways, or any way, we will list you as listener of the week. We've had people who have put our logo on the side of their cars. Paul, our race car driver. We've had people that have tried to get us on TuneIn. I think that's great. We've had people who have just talked us up to SVS and to the other manufacturers and stuff, and we will definitely mention you guys if you let us know that you've been doing that. Anything along those lines, anything to help support the podcast and get the news out there. So that's fantastic. Thank you guys so much. If you do want to get in contact with us. Yeah, if you do want to get in contact with us and let us know about any of these things or ask us a question, because this is the podcast where we answer your AV and home theater questions, you can contact Rob at AVRant, Rob, R-O-B, at avrant.com, Tom at avrant.com. Come to the website and comment. You can go to facebook.com/avrantpodcast. And on Twitter, Rob is at FirstReflect, and I am at avrant_Tom. I discovered something in the last couple of weeks. When you're laid up at home with a hurt foot and you don't do anything, you have nothing to tweet about. I actually opened Twitter and went, I don't have 140 characters with anything to say. So I was shocked that was the case, but that is the case. So there you go. Yeah. I did want to say, and Paul, I hope you're listening to this podcast because I know Paul kind of comes and goes, but I've been thinking about this, and I believe that our listener, Paul, would be fantastic to have a reality show about him. And this is why. First of all, it would be great exposure for the podcast. But more importantly, he's a race car driver. His daughter's a race car driver. We're Facebook friends, so I see all the sort of stuff he posts and stuff. And he seems like a very interesting, fascinating sort of dude. And you've got that whole Canadian thing, right? Because he's up there in Canada. And that whole Canadian thing is that on Canadian television, a certain amount of content has to be Canadian, right?
Yeah, that is true, yes.
It's a no-brainer. Somebody needs to make that happen. I think Paul should have his own reality show, and if anybody out there can make that happen, that'd be great. Because I think that'd be hilarious. Plus, they have to figure out a way to get it to America too, because I really want to see it. So yeah, I don't know why I've been thinking about that, but that's what happens on Vicodin. So I am technically off. I am off the Vicodin. I am now onto regular pills. My knee is healing. I am walking. It hurts, but I'm getting around a little bit, so that's good. I'll be getting out of the house a little bit more. I was at the store by myself for like the first time today. Yay! My life is so empty. But so let's go with some announcements real quick. We talked already about Chris from Odyssey. We're going to get that interview. We're still working on getting interviews with Josh and Richard from the Digital Media Zone. We're going to do that pretty soon. Hopefully they can do this sort of podcast so they can be on at night. Seems like they might be more up for that sort of thing. SVS has got a couple of announcements. This is not announcements for us, but SVS got a couple of announcements there. Now shipping within Canada directly from their own website, and they just announced that they're going to be in Best Buy Magnolia stores.
Specifically the design centers, though. So not every Best Buy has a Magnolia, and not every Magnolia has a design center, right? So
right.
It is a subset of a subset, but it's full-out retail in a big retailer.
And if you remember, you kind of heard it here first on our AV Rant interview with Gary Akubian of SVS. He talked about how one of his big pushes were going to be to get SVS in stores, and I was kind of like, yeah, that's going to happen. Because what I've always heard from the custom install market, people that you would generally think SVS would try to get, what stores they would try to get into, they would always say people come to look at the SVS subs, to see them, to hear them, and then they go to the website and buy. And I don't get any sales of this, so why do I want to carry SVS? Well, that makes sense because an SVS customer isn't really a custom install customer. Maybe they are, but generally speaking, they're not. They're home enthusiasts like we are. So, but put them in a Magnolia store makes a lot more sense to me because, first of all, these are customers that aren't going to Best Buy to buy things at all. But once you get them in a Best Buy, they might actually see something they need or want, or they might see something on the open box special and actually buy something while they're there. So it makes a lot more sense to me that they are going into Magnolia. But it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out. I'm very, very, very curious, very
Yeah,
fascinated.
and you kind of skipped past the Canada news there, but I wanted to give a little bit of the details there because what they're doing is they're shipping from a warehouse in Ontario, so it's not going across border or anything like that. They're still doing the 45-day trial with free shipping to any Canadian address, although there's some limitations for remote areas. However, if you end up returning it within that 45 days, you do have to pay return shipping for the Canadian version of this. It's a reduced rate. SBS handles all the paperwork and gives you a corporate shipping rate, so it's not the same thing as just walking in and sending back a gigantic subwoofer yourself. But yeah, so that's about the only difference. The prices listed on their website are still in U.S. currency, so you have to do a conversion rate on that too. And ultimately, we don't know what this means for Sonic Boom Audio because they were the website in Canada that handled SVS's Canadian sales. As of right now, Sonic Boom Audio is still up and running, but I don't know if any of that is changing or not. So we'll see as it happens.
Yes. I skipped over because I didn't care. It's Canadian. That's sorry. I figured you'd cover that crap. Anyways, so let's get right into our questions. We've got a lot here. We've got some stuff from Facebook that we'll talk about in a second. I guess Cameron spotted the first tablet with Dolby Atmos. Tablet with Dolby Atmos. They kept to hang the tablet from the ceiling. Mike thought of a way to get around limited subwoofer placement options. Nick has directly compared some popular Internet Direct speakers in his own home, and he questions our taste in subwoofers. Damn you. Bite your tongue, Nick. You shall burn upon a pyre of my hate. Sim updates us. Not really, Nick. Don't worry about that. Sim updates us on his friend's theater build and recommends some speakers. Infinite Gary has more questions because apparently that's what Infinite Gary does. He asked about active speakers, Atmos modules, and reflective ceilings. Bill is continuing his home theater plans. We talked about him in the last couple of weeks and asked for some advice on screens and speakers. Damon prompted Rob to put together a list of affordable speaker brands, which we'll be interested to hear about here, since he didn't share it with me, so it's being news to me as well. Tim is updating his theater room from the 90s and wants to figure out what to keep and what to get rid of. All of it and get new stuff. Except if you have amps. Amps you can keep. Subwoofers, if they're any good, you can keep those, and perhaps your speakers, I suppose, but all the electronics gotta go. Cameron wants some clarification on localizable bass. He has an over-the-air antenna question. Jeff is getting a second subwoofer, but he's trying to decide what to do with the one he already has. Jay asks about amplifier output ratings. Dan wants to know whom we can trust while shopping for a new TV. Us. Michael is having some troubles with his new DVR. That's because they suck. And Layton wonders if adding another subwoofer will improve things even further from what he's already improved. Layton is the one that we guilted him into, or cajoled him into moving his subwoofers to the corners like we have been suggesting. And when he did, it was like, ah, and Angels came down, and the bass was wonderful. Anyways, and he's looking at some new speakers and wants to know whether or not it's going to be an upgrade. So, start with Facebook. Last week we talked with Steven. He had his a little camouflaged SBS sub, which he had. It's still in the white wrapper majigger thing. A little cardboard thing that went around it, and he put it behind the couch. Took his wife a couple of days to find it, and I guess we posted that picture over at Facebook, and it became like a Where's Waldo, but with subwoofers. So.
Yep. And people had difficulties, so that's extra good news. That's exactly what you want. Is people weren't instantly sure. So
I think it's fantastic. I'm telling you, man. I mean, people say, like, oh, why do they always make white and black speakers? Because if a black speaker won't disappear into your room, a white one will. It all depends on your room and where you're going to put it. So yeah, that's awesome. Let's get with Cameron here. He sent us a link to the Amazon Fire HDX 8.9, because that rolls off the tongue, tablet that clearly marks it as being the first tablet with Dolby Atmos headphone support. Yay. So what is this? Yeah. So I read a little bit about it. Basically, it's a lot of claptrap about how they use binaural recordings and they do a DSP sort of thing in order to make things sound like it's coming from all around you, and yeah.
Well, the way I might have misinterpreted it, but the way they were describing it, it sounds as though it actually is Dolby Atmos recordings. So, for example, if you get things on Voodoo, you can have Dolby Digital Plus in Dolby Atmos. And so I'm not entirely sure if this is a separate thing or what they're saying is they have a processing that works with headphones but can use actual Dolby Atmos soundtracks, because that would actually be pretty darn cool. One soundtrack that can be played in all sorts of different ways and now processing for headphones. I I don't know if I misinterpreted that though.
I
Tell me,
skimmed
tell
it,
me.
so probably I'm looking at it right now, but I don't see where you can actually download specific. Maybe I'm missing it. Anyways, whatever. That's what it is. So yes, Dolby Atmos. Actually, to me, that makes even less sense. I mean, it'd be interesting, but now, so basically, you have to have a headphone output or the Dolby Atmos enabled headphone output, and then buy special music in order to
Um,
get it. Is
yeah,
that what you're
well,
saying?
I don't know because they have that whole Dolby Surround up mixer. So if every Dolby Atmos, if this holds true, because they're saying every AV receiver or processor that has Dolby Atmos decoding also has a Dolby Surround up mixer. If that's also true on the tablet, then it should be able to Dolby Surround up mix existing recordings. I don't they did not specify clearly at all. But
I don't know, dude. I tell you what, this is not. I've never ever thought, other than basic EQ, I've never ever thought, this headphone output needs some way to make it sound more surroundy. I've never thought
okay.
that. I've never ever thought that. You can do it. I mean, basically, it's just going to be more adding phase and weird stuff to it in order to trick your ear into thinking it's coming from above or behind or whatever. And even with the high end stuff that I've gotten in, planar headphones like I've got from Oppo, I still can't get anything to sound like it's coming from in front of me. It goes from all the way, it wraps all the way around my head and then goes across the headband. It's as far forward as I can get it to go. It just always sounds like it's going above my head. So, let's not assume that we're going to be able to plug in our Apple earbuds into a Dolby Atmos thing and it's suddenly going to sound amazing, because it's not going to do that. So, no. All right. So Mike had a fun comment that was half serious and half joking. Since there's been so much talk about ceiling speakers lately with Dolby Atmos, what about ceiling subwoofers? Obviously, it seems crazy at first, but it will allow for a lot more freedom in terms of placement, wouldn't it? Mike, there are ceiling subwoofers. That is a thing that exists. There's not a lot of them, but there are some that are specifically designed for ceilings. They're usually ceiling floor subs. They're both. And there's no reason why you couldn't put an in-wall subwoofer into your ceiling. I don't see why you would have a problem doing that. So yeah, are you still there?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm got some family stuff that's going on, so I'm checking things in between. If I sort of fade in and out, that is the reason for it. I apologize for that.
That's all right. I just was expecting to jump in at some point.
I know.
Uh, but yeah, there are in-ceiling subs, and any in-wall or in-floor subwoofer will work into an in-ceiling placement. There's no reason why you can't do that. The obvious problem that you're going to run into is subwoofer. The in-wall subwoofers tend to be heavier, so you're going to have to make sure that you follow the manufacturer's recommendations, and I would talk to them first before you did that. That being said, jeez, dude, that's a lot of work to put a subwoofer up there when you're just going to shove it. You just want to shove it in the corner, anyways. So I don't know that I would go through all that, but it could work. There's no reason why it wouldn't. There's no reason why it couldn't. Uh, yeah, so let's go on since I'm
Yes.
talking to
Sorry about
myself
that.
now. Nick, Nicholas will be constructing his dedicated theater with 2 rows of seating and a false wall to hold his acoustically transparent projection screen in the future. But for right now, he's been auditioning speakers. They need to be compact so they can go behind the screen, but they still need to be able to fill his 12 by 22 by 8 foot room. That's not that big, dude. He directly compared the SVS Ultra Sub bookshelf speakers, the Ascend Acoustic Sierra 2 bookshelf speakers, and the Purion Audio Veris Grand center speakers. 2 of them set up as a stereo pair.
Yeah, it was a little bit of an odd choice, but that's what he went with.
Yeah, that's weird. Okay, but whatever. He did that. He thought that all of them performed well. Um, all of them easily got loud enough, played with great delineation, and of different instruments and voices, and none of them were fatiguing. He thought that the SVS fell a little behind in terms of imaging. He thought the Various Grand had the largest soundstage, which kind of makes sense considering he used one with a center channel. Uh, did he stand them up? Did he stand
I
them up?
I am not
I
sure.
don't
He
think
didn't
you
specify
can
that.
because
Yeah.
they have rounded ends. I know this because I've got one standing up in the other room that falls over all the time. I mean, it wants to fall over. I had to tilt it. So he must have had them down. It's really weird. Anyways, but the Ascend Acoustics CR2 had the best clarity and overall sense of sounding more natural and transparent. He decided to keep those based on his listenings comparison, but he regrets that he wasn't able to hear the RBH SX61R since his local dealer did not have them on hand for audition. He's also interested in a Philharmonic Audio Philharmonitor. Oh, that's idiotic.
Yeah, that's the name.
Philharmonitor speakers, but he's probably already pushing his luck with his wife who just gave birth. Yay, congratulations, Nick. You have a baby and new speakers. Yeah,
Yes,
that's a lot of reading.
it is double joy.
Uh, yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Did he go with the upgraded tweeter?
Yeah, yeah, it's the CR2, the one that has the ribbon tweeter
Yeah,
in a bookshelf form. So yeah, I mean
I'm not
that totally
surprised.
goes in line with my experience as well. And this is one of those things where, if someone came to me and said, you know what, I preferred the SVS Ultras myself when I did this comparison, or I preferred the Imperium Various Grand speakers, for I like the wider soundstage that they provided versus what the CR2s offered. I'd be like, yeah, that totally makes sense. All of
Yeah,
these are good speakers,
yeah.
but it's great that he got a chance to hear them for himself in his own room with his own ears and decide what he liked best.
It
That's
sounds like
absolutely the way to do it.
the differences weren't huge, and I think that's something that's going to
Right. Yeah.
come down a little bit later on in this podcast if we can get to the end, where we're going to be talking about some people who are asking our opinions of certain speakers. I mean, this is not just a preference thing. It's not just what speakers design best thing. It's how good these particular speakers sounded in this particular room, with in these particular positions. So in the end, I think that if he had just bought any one of these, he probably would have been happy. The fact that he was able to compare all three of them, he could pick the one he liked the best, which makes him
Right.
happier. But
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't, But I think that they were. It was. I wouldn't say it's six of one, half dozen of another, but it's definitely, these are all real quality speakers. So any of these, if he came to me and said I liked all of them, but I thought the SVSs looked the best, so I bought them, I'm like, that's fine. That
Yep.
sounds reasonable to me. And the RBH and stuff like that. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I just cannot stress enough to these manufacturers the real importance of having things available for people to test, to
Yep.
hear. Did RBH lose out on the sale? Maybe. Did Philharmonic Audio lose out in the sale? Maybe. But you're just not going to buy something when you've got three at hand and all three of them sound pretty good. Two of them are neck and neck, and these, you're not going to go, well, I'll just go buy this one completely unheard. You're just not going to do that. So I just wish that these companies would just kind of get on board and realize that this direct-to-consumer model is it's just the way to go. And I'm telling you, if I owned a speaker company, this is what I would do. I would even if I wanted to retail them through dealers or through Best Buy or through whatever, I would say, okay, you want to audition them in your home? Give me, here's your credit. Give me a credit card number, and I will send you some unfinished speakers. I mean, they're just, MDF, so they're going to be beat up and everything else. Doesn't make any difference. Going to go from place to place. You're going to, we'll ship them to you. You'll ship them back. You've got this much time to audition, or we charge your card. Or we don't give you the refund on the card, sort of thing. So it just makes total sense to me to have the ability to test these things in your home. Maybe there's a waiting list for that sort of thing, and that's fine. But at least it's better than RBH and Philharmonic losing out. Now, I don't know anything about Philharmonic Audio, but I know that.
They are internet direct too, so.
I
That
know
is unheard of.
RBH, and they would have sounded amazing. Would they have sounded as
Hmm.
good as these other three? I don't know. I never AB'd them either, but they would have sounded amazing. So it's too bad for RBH, but good for Nick, who got some good speakers.
Hmm.
Nick also wanted to mention that we wasn't so sure we should continue to recommend the SVS SB2000 so highly. He thinks it's a great sub for just $100 more. The
Hmm.
Power Sound Audio XS15 SE looks as though it can play even louder, lower, and according to some measurements on database.com, I don't know, I couldn't find them.
That's Josh Ritchie's site, so he's done a bunch of reviews for Audioholic,
Oh,
so he
he's in
has
the
also
yeah, okay, that makes sense.
measurements.
It okay. It has tighter transient response and lower group delay. If the slightly higher price and larger cabinet size are accessible, isn't the XS15 SE the better buy? Now the Power Sound Audio, those are the guys who started SVS and then they sold SVS and now they started Power Sound and they're back to making big ass subwoofers again. Uh, yeah, it does look like the Power Sound Audio is a very good stuff. I can't deny that. It's also considerably larger. It's like 3 inches in almost every dimension. And when you say, oh,
More,
it's only
yeah.
just 3 inches, um, or maybe a little bit more than 3 inches, that's huge. That's a huge amount of difference. You can't really it just sounds so small. It is massive. Your sub just got much bigger. It's also got a 15-inch driver instead of a 12-inch driver, so
Hmm.
that should tell you something right there. Um,
And the thing that the measurements show more than anything is that, I mean, this is purely a technical thing. Once you get it into anything that would be called a reasonably sized room, this isn't the way it's going to sound. But out in a wide open field, being measured that way, the way they've sort of designed it is that they're just relying on it being a sealed box. They're not shaping the output in any way. So it is technically, in that sense, a less linear sub because it can get louder in the 40 and 50 hertz range, but then it rolls off. Whereas SVS is actually shaping the output using their DSP, so it stays linear down to a lower frequency, but then that's why there's a little bit more distortion because they're boosting the output in the lowest frequencies because it's a sealed box. So yeah, you're comparing a 14-inch cube with a 12-inch driver with some shaping of the output using DSP versus a cube, or not a cube, one that's about 17 by 18 by 19 and a half, which is considerably larger
that's
with
like
a
that is
15-inch and
yeah.
then no shaping. So yeah, these are substantially different subwoofers.
Yeah, the thing to remember too is that, and I've got nothing against Power Sound Audio
No,
one
not
way
at
or
all.
the other. I haven't really heard any of their subs, and in a room with your multi-Q sub EQ HT or whatever that you might be running, you may be able to get some really flat frequency response out of the thing, anyways. Uh, but frankly, the people that were recommending the SB2000 are got smaller rooms. They don't have to have a huge amount of output. We're really looking for extension and cost. It's really what we're looking for is extension and cost, and
And
usually a
physical
smaller
size.
box. Yeah,
Yeah.
physical size. So really, it ticks all the boxes there. Hey, keep recommending. Guys, if you guys a favorite sub out there that you think we should recommend, I'm more than willing to take a look at it. If you told me you bought the sub and you loved it, I would not say you were an idiot. I
Oh yeah.
would say that you made a good purchase. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think it's he was sort of implying that anytime we were going to recommend the SB2000, maybe we should recommend the XS15 SE in its place. I am not personally going to be doing that because it is going to be a matter of, yeah, it's still smaller, it's still cheaper, it still plays linearly, just not as loud.
Right.
So yeah, I still see high value in the SB2000 myself.
Yeah. 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 Well, you got to remember, SVS made their, when these guys started SVS, they made their name on, lots of output,
Mm-hmm.
uh, lots of drivers in one box sometimes, and being very loud. I mean, a really low extension. Linearity was not really part of the equation. It was just about how much sound can you get out of these things and how low can it hit. And that sells, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's going to be great in a lot of people's rooms. But I think that SVS has kind of evolved beyond that as a company, as they're getting more technically adept. And I don't think that's a bad thing. So if you want more output, then and you can handle the bigger box, go ahead. knock yourself out. Sim got back to us after we discussed his plans for his friend's home theater last week. He says our recommendations for the subwoofer placement were helpful and they'll likely go with diagonally opposed opposite corners with just two subwoofers. That's what I suggested.
Mm-hmm.
I think Rob agreed with that, so there was no problem there.
I did.
He wanted to clarify the drawings weren't consistently to scale, whatever. So all the stuff that we were saying about where he had placed speakers and chairs and stuff, not to really worry about it, which is fine. On the speaker front, Sim just wanted to comment that we seem to favor standard tower and bookshelf speaker. He's been extremely impressed with some of the speakers that use multiple tweeters, like the MK Sound S150s, that Ken Kestrel's,
Kreisel.
whatever, Q125s, and the XTC Sound Cinema Series things. We might change your tune, especially about on-wall speakers if we heard them. I have never had a problem with multiple tweeter systems. RBH, their high-end flagship what was it, T50s, whatever they were, T30s.
The T series, whatever it was.
Yeah. It was something,
Well,
and
the
it was two
T1,
boxes, and they
T2.
put them both in one box. Yeah, T1 and T2s, and then there was the T30s.
Yeah,
It was the
T30
all-in-one box.
SEs. They were
Yeah.
all in one big cabinet instead of sort of separate cabinets that you join.
4 tweeters in those bad boys, and I never said a bad word about them. There's a real reason to do these things, but then again, when RBH went and made their new flagship ones, they got away from the multiple tweeters and went back to one tweeter. So that should tell you something right there. There's no reason why you can't make any. I'm speaker design and agnostic. I really don't care. You want to use a electrostatic? I'm fine. You want to use planar? I'm fine. You want a plasma or diamond or beryllium? I don't care. Use 15 tweeters in there for all. I use a line array from top to bottom with 2-inch tweeters,
right.
top to bottom. I don't care. If it sounds good, it sounds good. So you don't have to convince me that these other speakers can sound good. I am perfectly willing to believe that. I do not believe that aluminum sounds tinny. I do not believe that that Kevlar and woven woofers sound textured. I don't believe that paper ones sound, I don't know, papery or something, or thin. I just don't believe any of that. I think a well-designed speaker with that's performing within its parameters by somebody who knows what they're doing with a good crossover, anything can sound good. Any mixture of drivers and materials can sound good. So Sim, I'm sure I have no tune to change. I agree that these can sound good.
When it comes to me, I'm all for using on-wall speakers in the situations where that's what's going to work. You want to put your speakers behind an acoustically transparent screen and have a very large screen size with no way to accommodate that otherwise? Absolutely, that's where it makes sense. My only quibble with on-wall speakers is that you just have to be careful. That's all. I just want to always say that there's the caveat that you have to think about the acoustics of what you're doing when you're mounting a speaker onto a wall. So, all the recommendations that are given for building a baffle wall and acoustically treating it so that that front wall is absorptive and you're not running into the problems where you're getting the boundary gain effects, and if the speaker's been well designed, and that usually means a little bit higher cost, all the ones he listed are not exactly cheap speakers. So all of these things are just things to consider, and then you have to be careful with the placement, because once you mounted them on or in the wall, if you're doing in-wall speakers, that's a lot harder to adjust. You're not adjusting the toe in on your speakers once you've got them all mounted, or especially if it's in walls. So it's just those things. It's not that I outright favor towers and bookshelves over on walls or in walls. It's just that you have to be careful with the other ones. So that's why it might sound like I'm warning people away from them. It's not that. It's just being aware. That's all.
Yeah. All right. So on to Infinite Gary of the 3 to 15-part question. I'm not really sure here. Gary is getting interested in active speakers because why not? He's browsing offerings like the Dynaudio 110As and Seaton Sparks. Of course, the Grimani system speakers that we talked about last week. We talked about those last week?
We
did.
$400,000 speakers.
Oh, yeah, those were active speakers.
They're active.
Gary's just curious about active speakers in general. Thought that'd be a good topic of discussion. Advantage, disadvantage, whether we think this trend might become more popular moving forward. And now that Atmos could potentially make use of many more speakers in our homes, active speakers kind of make a lot of sense, don't they? As opposed to, say, trying to build more and more amplifier channels into AV receivers. Power, Gary. Power is the problem. It is much easier to run one power cord to a wall at your receiver and then power everything through speaker wire to your speakers than it is to have to plug every single speaker, ceiling mounted or not. into the wall, and then also run a cable from your receiver or whatever it is, which is now going to have to be a coax cable out to each individual speaker. On top of that, you end up with these problems of level matching, which is not, it's a one-time problem, but it's one that always kind of irks me, where you can't set the channel levels as easily from the receiver because, well, I mean, right now you generally can't set them from the receiver. You have to go behind each speaker and set the channel levels that way, which becomes another irksome part of it. Um, we've had active speakers for a really long time. If they were gonna catch on, they would have caught on, and it's just to me, it's not worth it. On top of it, you're now paying for, instead of having one massive transformer and let's say you have an outboard amp or a big receiver, instead of having one massive transformer with tons of capacitors that you can dump all of it into one or two channels if you need to, you now have 5, 7, 9, 10 individual amps, all with their own capacitor banks, all with their own transformers, which is not going to have the headroom, not going to have the power reserves available that you would if you have a single standalone amp. There's just so many reasons why individual, they really make sense when you're sitting within arm's reach of them, like at a desk. They really make sense there. As soon as you start putting them into a home theater, the cabinets, the speakers themselves become more expensive. You're sucking up cabinet space for amplifier and all the stuff that goes in there. It's just, I don't know. I just don't see them taking off, dude.
Well, that certainly covers the disadvantages. I mean, on the advantages side, where they definitely have an advantage is that you can have one amplifier for one driver and DSP processing that is already pre-programmed by the manufacturer so that that one amplifier is perfectly tuned to drive that one driver and nothing else. And that's where, using Class D amplifiers that are specialized and DSP programmed that way, that's where they can shine. And then they don't have to be so huge and they don't have to put out a lot of heat, and they can deliver many, many watts very efficiently without having to suck up a lot of power out of the wall and wasting all of that on heat like regular Class AB amplifiers do. So, I mean, there certainly are the advantages there. It's a question of whether or not, the setup part of it is going to be more of a problem versus the end results if you're willing to go through all of that or have a custom installer do it for you. I certainly see a trend in terms of custom installers. I think custom installers are definitely going to be moving more and more towards active speakers for all of those reasons. I mean, Phase Technology did that years and years ago, except that, they had each individual amplifier was separately manually programmable, right? It wasn't done at the factory. You did it during the install, that type of thing. So, yep, there's the advantage there. It's a lot more complexity. It's 2 wires for every speaker now instead of 1. So, yeah, trade-offs, but I see a future in them for the high-end enthusiast and the installer market.
Yeah, which means there's no future. I mean, not any more than there already is. Gary's still planning to put together a 5.1.4, which is, let me see. So it's a 5.1 system with 4 Atmos enabled speakers, so they'll be bouncing off the ceiling.
Yeah.
Not in this dedicated theater, but in a second room, in a spare bedroom, you'll be using upward firing Atmos speakers, like I just said. He already has a Revell speaker set up in this room, so he would just like to hear our opinion. Would we opt to keep the Revell Performa Generation 2 speakers and use add-on modules, or would we replace everything with Andrew Jones Pioneer Elite Atmos-enabled speakers?
Shall I go first?
Might as well, dude, because I'm going to be all sorts of positive about this thing, but go on.
So the gigantic problem here is I haven't heard any of these things.
No,
I have no idea. I have no ears on time with any of them. I like the looks of the design of, say, the KEF modules, but they're also $1,200 a pair just for the upward firing modules by themselves. That, to me, is a problem in terms of value. I mean, I'm going to rely a little bit on the reports that came out of CEDIA and IFA where people got a chance to listen to the demonstrations that were given. By and large, just taking it in summation, what everybody that I could find online was saying, the Pioneer demo seemed like it impressed most people. A lot of people were impressed with the illusion that the sound was coming from overhead, more so than some of the other demonstrations. And one of the things we talked about in the interview with Chris from Odyssey today is that when you're dealing with these upward firing modules, there is the sound that's still coming directly forward, the sound that isn't reflecting off of the ceiling. And so when it's one speaker that's all been designed together as one cohesive speaker, I tend to think maybe they were able to sort of account for that a little more than when it's a completely separate module from a completely different brand. We're not entirely sure how that's all going to work together cohesively, and that might be the reason why, by and large, the people who said that the Pioneer demo at Cedia was more impressive than some of the others. So when you add up the idea of the price, because the Pioneer Elite Atmos speakers are not that expensive, especially if you're going for the bookshelf models, it's kind of like I'm almost leaning that way myself. But then again, why would you give up the Revel Performance speakers? Because those are already great speakers. So this is tough. This is a tough decision to me.
See, I don't know how much stock I put into those initial reports, mostly because think about what they were listening for. Were they listening for really good surround sound? Were they listening for really good quality of sound? Were they looking for even frequency response? Were they listening for like you would go and listen to if you were demoing speakers, or were they just trying to see whether or not the sound went over their heads convincingly? To me, I don't know that they were paying as much attention to these other aspects. Would I dump speakers like these Revell speakers that Yuki already has? Would I dump them in favor of the Andrew Jones? I would have a hard time making that suggestion. You can find a way to demo them, then maybe. But I don't know, man. The KEF one seems to make a lot more sense than the concentric drivers make a lot more sense. But really, when it comes down to,
Gesundheit.
I
managed to mute his mic in time.
managed to mute my mic before I almost blew up all over my screen.
Neutron bomb sneeze.
Geez. But what we've heard from Chris and others is that there is a specific curve that Dolby requires you to have for these upward firing speakers. This DSP magic that they're doing in order to make the bouncing happen the way it's supposed to happen and everything else. I just don't know that we're gonna, I think that's why we're hearing that these bouncy speakers are sounding a little bit better. That DSP is happening not at the speaker. That's happening in the Atmos processing. So there's no reason why you can't. I don't care what they say. It is cut. It has high pass, low pass filters, from what I understand, and it does its DSP magic. So you should be able to get just about any old speaker and bounce it off the stupid ceiling. So why not? If you're going to go through all this trouble, instead of going straight to 5.1.4, go 5.1.2. Get a couple of bookshelf speakers that match your Revell speakers, and see how that sounds. Just angle them up there and see if it's something that you're
I know in the
interested
case of Gary specifically, part of it is that he wants to demo for himself the upward firing drivers, like as an experiment.
Yeah.
How it works. So, I have no problem with that. I'm curious about that too. So
I'm not curious enough to spend any money on it, but I'm curious. Yeah. I mean, if you want to do it, Gary, let us know. You don't need our permission.
Right.
We'll just give you a hard time afterwards. Gary was also reading through the Past Labs SR2 speaker manual, noted on page 6 of the manual. I guess we'll link this up someplace.
Sure.
Where they talk about speaker placement and setup. They wrote that reflective floors, while not ideal, are typically less disruptive than highly reflective ceilings. Is this correct? Because if so, doesn't that make the entire notion of upward firing Atmos speakers that bounce off their sound off hard reflective ceilings bad for all of the sounds? I think the idea here, Gary, that they're saying less disruptive is because the speakers are closer to the ground, so it bounces and then goes over your head, rather than the speaker bouncing off the ceiling and then hitting you, which a lot of people, what they do is they'll either put absorption right up there, or diffusion is very common to put some diffusion up there as well, or both. I think Gene's Theater had, I want to say Gene, when the last time that when he first got it installed, I think there was diffusion at that first reflection point from on the ceiling there. I think that later on he changed that in some way because he didn't like he didn't like the way it sounded. But I don't really remember.
I'm not sure I agree with the statement that the floor bounce is less disruptive than the ceiling bounce. That to me doesn't really ring true. I think it's more just a matter of, that floor bounce is going to be there. what are you going to do? Put 6-inch thick absorptive material all over your floor? Like
That'd be
at most,
awesome.
you're going to put a rug down there, right?
My home
So it's
theater's in a bouncy house.
yeah, exactly. We're suspended 90 feet in the air. Well, let's go back to
Woohoo!
that. I
That'd
mean,
be awesome.
yeah, it's just a matter of, the floor bounce is going to be there, and we know roughly at least how high the speaker is going to be. We don't know for sure how high the ceiling is going to be. So I think it's more a matter of the ceiling bounce is less predictable than the floor bounce. I think the floor bounce is probably more predictable in that
Yeah, that's
you
probably
pretty
true.
much know the height and you pretty much know what's going to be there. It's not going to be some vaulted floor.
Right.
It's gonna be a flat parallel floor that doesn't have a huge amount of absorption on it, and it's not gonna be all jaggy or a popcorn floor either.
Unless you have
So
like a boat themed, and you're in the hull, right? And so it's a vaulted floor.
but
That's
yeah, as for the how that comes about with the Atmos ceiling reflecting speakers, it's like, yeah, that's something we've been saying from the beginning. A lot of people who've put effort into their theaters and had an acoustician come in and measure their room and acoustically treat it. It's like you ended up with treatments on your ceiling,
either
and it's
diffusion or absorption. Either one of them
yeah,
is bad for Atmos. There's going to be
that's
something
right.
there. I guarantee you, if you paid somebody to do your room, there's not nothing there. That every first reflection point in your
Hmm.
room has been treated in some way, either through diffusion or through absorption, or maybe a little bit of both. But something's there, and that's bad for Atmos. So
Yeah, I mean, Atmos has made no bones about this. They developed the whole idea of the upward firing Atmos-enabled speakers and modules because they knew that people who had a regular room, who are putting a surround sound system into a multi-purpose room or a living room or a bedroom or a den or something like that, they are not going to install speakers on or in their ceiling, and they are not going to acoustically treat their ceiling. That's just not what anybody who's in that situation is doing. So that's where the reflective speakers make sense because, like, yeah, we know you're going to have a flat ceiling up there, and we know you're not going to install speakers. So here you go. Here's a way that you can still have Atmos in such a setup. I don't think they've ever come out and said, if you've got $1 million to spend, you're going to be opting for the upward firing drivers. So that's sort of where I fall on that.
you know what
That
I'm
deal.
going to suggest to Gary? I think that Gary needs to do is get himself a ticket to CES or CEDIA one of these years.
Hmm.
I don't know where he lives exactly, but I would recommend doing something like that, or finding out from Pioneer or whomever, where they're going to be demoing this sort of stuff
Well, he
yet
went
next.
to that Dolby Atmos demo.
Then
He
why
went
does he
there.
have to hear it in his room? Why is he got
It's not a controlled demo now.
whatever? Gary, Gary,
You like
that's
fucking Gary.
I
I know.
like Gary. Gary's good. I think it's there's some poetic justice in the fact that I know that Gary emails you a lot because I remember what that was you and me all the time. So Gary's he's your Rob. That's how
I
that works.
see.
There we go. Anyway, so Bill is continuing his planning process for his unfinished 14 by 9 foot 9 inches and dang it, Rob, 14 by
That
19
is
and a
sta-
half and 8.5. I'm rounding.
that is
Dedicated
a very
theater room.
standard way of denoting the size of a
I know it
room. You don't
is,
know
but
feet and inches.
well, it's
Should I
just
convert it to millimeters for you? Would that
no, just decimals, just decimal it to me.
that's
It's some sort of reasonable thing like 0.75, 0.25,
well,
point
tell
0.5.
you what, move the imperial system over to something that works with decimals instead of 12 inches per foot, and I'll go ahead and do that
I'm not
for you.
saying I like the imperial system, all right? I just think that I can't tell you how many centimeters anything is. I can't look at something and go, that's that many centimeters or millimeters. And that was after living for 2.5 years in Australia where I had to. I was always like, they're like, how many centimeters? I'm like, I don't. It's about an inch. He goes, oh, 3. I'm like, what? Okay, whatever. I think that's 3. Anyway, see, I don't know still. Anyways, he's got his theater. This is the guy who's got a basement and part of it's unfinished, and he's going to turn
Mhm.
it into a home theater. And we told him to close off. I told him to close off one door, and he's going to open up doors, and that's what he's doing. We told him where to put his subwoofers last time, and I assume that's what he's doing because
Yep.
we're brilliant. So now that we've covered the dimensions of his room, he should be fine, and that the hanging light fixture that his wife wants to hang in the middle, that was last week, of the room
Mhm.
shouldn't prevent a projector setup. He's turning his attention to planning out the screen size, seating location, and front speakers. Bill likes the idea of leaving about 4 feet behind the seats at the back of the room. That would leave him with just around 14 to 15 foot viewing distance. He'd like it as large a screen as appropriate. How big is that front wall? Because that's how big you can have it.
14 feet wide.
There you go. That's how big.
Oh man,
Do you want to have to
you're gonna
turn
need
your
a heck of a
head?
projector.
That's true. But then again, I mean, how big? Okay, anyways. Here's one of the biggest screens so large that it forces the front, left, and right speakers all the way into the corners. Basically, he's trying to plan it all out. And he has a preference for fixed frame screen and floor standing or stand mounted speakers as opposed to in wall or on wall front speakers. What can we suggest?
Can I
Uh,
go first?
yeah, please, because I don't know.
Okay, so my first thing is I would actually, in this situation, move the seat even a little bit closer to the front. I would try to place it at the 1/3 mark, so 1/3 of the way into the room from the back, 2/3 of the way away from the front, which
Yeah.
would give you about a 12 to 12.5 foot viewing distance instead of 14 to 15. Give you 6.5 feet or so behind your seat to the back wall. He mentioned that he wanted to maybe have a table somewhere in one of the back corners or something like that. So that would better accomplish that too. But one of the reasons I like that idea is because he's talking about this. He's in the planning stage. He's working this all out. So if you were to get yourself a 12 to 12.5 foot viewing distance, I would personally really like the idea of going with a 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio screen in here. Because I like the idea that when you're watching 16 by 9 HD TV content, that is smaller than when you're watching CinemaScope wider 2.35 to 1 aspect movies. That to me is the way to do a projector. So if you do that, you could go with a projection screen 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio that's 110 inches wide, not 110 inches diagonal. It ends up being about 120 inches diagonal for a 2.35 aspect ratio. But about 110 inches wide. And that, well, after you factor in the frame, because you're going for a fixed frame too, you'd end up with about 2 feet on either side of the screen, which isn't totally ideal for your speakers, but as long as you put some acoustic treatments on the side walls and the first reflection points next to those speakers, at least they'll be a foot away from the wall.
Yeah, you
They'll
could
be
pull
right
them in a
beside your
little. You could
screen.
pull them into the, in front of the in front of the
Screen, just a
screen, and
touch.
yeah. Well, you would want to anyways. Get them
Mm-hmm.
off the back wall, and then you could cheat them in a bit too,
Yeah.
because you're not gonna have people sitting way out to the sides anyways. So you might be able to
But
get a foot and a half, 2 feet off the wall,
yeah,
depending on how far forward you push those speakers.
but for me, that's sort of the nicest way to compromise between not sacrificing too much on your speaker placement, getting a very large screen. That'll give you a nice, like, 40-degree field of view when you're using the entire width of it. Of course, you'd want to get a projector at that point that has, because you know me, I'm not a huge fan of putting the anamorphic lens thing in there, so I would go for one that has a motorized zoom and has the lens memory, so it's as simple as pushing a button on your remote and it zooms in to fill the entire width of the screen, push another button and it zooms out to only fill 16 by 9. In his case, I know last week he mentioned having a budget of maybe about $5,000. I would head right to one of the JVCs. Probably the X35 or the X500R. Those are the ones in that price range. They have the motorized zoom. The Sonys that compete in that price range, they don't have motorized zoom. The Epsons in that price range don't have motorized
Is
zoom.
this 5 grand
Um,
for just the projector, or for the entire
yeah,
room?
no, he was saying just for the projector.
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, that's right. I
but
remember that now. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and the JVC X35 is down in the $3,000-$3,500 range. So
Save some money, dude.
yeah. So that should work there. And then for the screen itself, I would head you right towards Seymour AV in this case, because if you're going for the 2.35 to 1 screen, they have that lovely masking, which is manual masking. You have to physically walk up and stick it on with magnets, but it pops right on. It's very cool. And then you can mask off the sides when you're watching 16 by 9. So that's the way I'd go. I like their screens too, just the way they set them up, the way they have the sort of hook and loop rubber grommets to secure the screen. I really like that connection method.
Yeah, that's I can get behind all of that, to be honest with you. When you start
Yay!
talking about 2.35 to 1, and if you want to go that direction, you can. Or you can just buy a regular 120-inch screen and just not
Hmm.
worry about it. But yeah, the Seymour AV, if you decide to go that way, their manual masking system makes the most sense to me,
Yeah,
because
it's so much cheaper.
it's so much cheaper, it's so easy. It's just a matter of you running up there and doing it, and at the very beginning of a movie, it's not like you have to worry about. I just the worst case scenario is your kids go in to watch something. It's set up for 2.35 to 1. They're watching, you know, Digimon on Netflix, and the top and the bottoms are squished because of it, or cut off because of it. And their kids don't care anyways. They suck.
Yeah,
All
and I
right.
will
So
say that if you have the budget and you want motorized because you want to be able to push a button and have the screen masking move in, Karada, they do have their Masquerade
yeah,
masking
Clint's
system, which
got
is
that.
yeah, it's about the least expensive from the motorized masking ones. So
It's not cheap though, dude.
it's not cheap
It's
at
not like
all,
three
but it is
grand
about the
or
least
something.
expensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's not cheap. I've seen it. It does. It's really cool. It is
Hmm.
super cool. There's no doubt about it, but it is not cheap. So you look into it, man. If you save 2 grand on your projector by getting the JVC that he's recommending, which is fine. I don't have projectors on the tip of my tongue. That's not my thing. Rob does, so yay. Rob contributing. Uh, maybe you can afford the Corrada, and then you can be super cool. Uh, or maybe you can find one discount somehow. Damon asked Rob for some quick recommendations for inexpensive speakers that can be purchased online. And of course, you got one of Rob's. We'll call them well-worded replies, I guess. You know.
Verbose.
Yeah. You haven't actually gotten an email. You've gotten one from Rob. Let's just put it to you that way. You haven't truly experienced the joy of email until you open the email. You go, well, screw this. I'll have to wait till lunch because that's when I'll have enough time to read all that. That's when you know you've been emailed.
You haven't
Rob
figured out
emails you right in your face.
why they
Uh,
charge for bandwidth in text messages until you've had one of my replies that eats up all the data in the world in text form.
I'm only waiting for. I keep thinking. My wife's like, you should be able to call Rob. I mean, I think that we've got our plan goes to Canada. I'm like, yeah. Then he starts texting me, and then God help me, my phone will do nothing but explode. So maybe we can run through. So what was your list?
Okay, so luckily I'll be able to copy and paste this directly onto Facebook and avrant.com without having to type it again. I did have to use Twit longer because this came in via tweet, and there's no way this was fit into 140 characters. So yeah, I ran through a list from cheapest to sort of most expensive. Started out with the Monoprice 10565. That's an awesome model number, but that's what it is. They're about $250. It's a 5.1 system, which is basically a clone of the Energy Take Classic speakers.
Yeah, back in the day.
But for that price, pretty much can't beat them. Everything cheaper than that is pretty much garbage. So that's as low as you can go. Next up, I would take a serious look if you're going low price range at the Vizio sound bars because they have their S4251, which actually has a wireless subwoofer, and then it has 2 separate surround speakers. They plug into the subwoofer. So the idea is you put the subwoofer towards the rear of your room and then have the 2 speakers that are wired into that sub, but then they're wireless connected to the soundbar itself. There's also a larger one, the S5451W, and that one is pretty darn decent. The one downside of the 42-inch version is that it doesn't have any HDMI inputs. The 54-inch version does. I mentioned the Energy Take Classics. They're like a more expensive version of the Monoprice ones. Look nicer, too. And then, of course, the Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers. Not the Pioneer Elite ones, but the regular Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers, the Generation 2s. Recommend those all the time. Then out of those Andrew Jones speakers, if there's a weak link among them, it's the subwoofer in there. I think the speakers themselves are good enough that it's worth upgrading the subwoofer and not going with the 8-inch sub that Pioneer provides. So I really, really like the HSU STF2 in terms of just value, what you get for that subwoofer. It is a $350 subwoofer, so it's not cheap, but compared to what else is out there, I love that one. Speaking of HSU, I like their speakers too. They're horn loaded, more efficient if you need that. And speaking of high efficiency, if you want like crazy loud output for about the lowest price you can get, there is Bic America. They have their Acoustech speakers. Those are also
They
horn
still
loaded.
sell those things.
They do indeed.
I remember when those things were like the hot. Everybody had to have them. God,
Because they were inexpensive and very efficient. So if you had like a very low powered receiver, you could still play them crazy loud.
I have to get HSU to send me those speakers because I reviewed their Generation 1s one, and I just loathed them. They were so...
Well, Generation 2 came shortly after because you weren't the only one, so
yeah.
there was that. Now, I forgot to mention, surprisingly, when I replied back to Damon, but EMP Tech. They would fit in the next slot. Gotta love EMP Tech in terms of gorgeous looking speakers for the price. I don't think you'll find anything that looks better for that price. Now,
Not possible.
They're certainly not small. They're large speakers, but they're very nice looking, very good sounding, and can play exceedingly loud. They take amplifier power to do that, but they can play incredibly loud. So if you have a big room and you need to fill it on the, low
And they
budget.
really still maintain the signature RBH sound
Hmm.
as much as they can. They're not going to have the extension on the high end and the low end that you get from the higher end RBH speakers. But I have reviewed these speakers. I was blown away by them.
Yeah.
That is an easy hands down recommendation.
Hmm.
If you get to this part of the list and this is as much as you can afford,
Hmm.
you'll be doing well. This is an easy recommendation.
So I had a couple more that I certainly wouldn't call inexpensive speakers, but very high value. Ascend Acoustics, of course, I end up recommending them. In particular, their smallest speaker, that's their HTM 200s. I really like these because they're incredibly versatile. They're a sealed speaker. They're only about 6.5 inches from front to back, so they can be wall mounted. They can be put inside of sort of like a shelving unit or in a bookcase or something like that. They have a design that has more controlled dispersion, so they cope really well with less than ideal placement, and they're a nice size that fits almost anywhere. And I really like the tweeter that's in them, especially for the price range. And then there's the whole Ascend Acoustics lineup, of course, but they start getting pretty pricey when you go up. And then Aperion Audio, they have their Intimus line too, and those are really nice looking. If you want something that's a gloss piano black instead, I put them sort of toe to toe with the Ascend Acoustics SE series. So there's the alternative there. And after that, you start getting into stuff that I would definitely not call inexpensive any longer. So
Well,
that's where my list
what
ends.
about the NHT? What are they
Yep,
called? The
NHT.
zeros? What are
Yep,
they?
they're Zero series. Yep.
Yeah, they're what $100 a pop or something like that, $100 a
Yeah,
pair.
they're in that. Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what they are, but those are very small speakers.
Hmm.
Really, that's just a beautiful speaker to start with if you can
Hmm.
afford it. They will get loud. They won't get, they're not super huge, but really good sounding, really clean, very small. Uh, they're the kind of speaker that you don't get rid of.
Right.
That's just the thing. You
You
always
always
find a
find a
way
place
to
for them.
use
Yeah.
them. You know what I mean? You're like,
Yep.
oh, I need an Atmos speaker. Where's those NHDs? Where are those at? Yeah, let me just tilt one of those up there and see what that sounds like. I'm telling you. Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
that's a really easy
I
one.
threw out some other brands as a catch-all because I mean, obviously I can't give an entirely comprehensive list. If your favorite speakers are not on my list, doesn't mean I think they're bad. It's nothing like that. There's Fluence, there's HTD, Kef and Boston Acoustics. They both sell over at accessories for less, so you can get their speakers at a discount from them. So there's lots of options out
Yeah,
there. But
Kef's a good one too.
yeah,
All right,
you can
let's get
almost certainly
going.
find something out of that list. Yes.
Yes. Tim is a new listener. He has a home theater set up in his
Hmm.
basement back in the 90s with a 36-inch tube TV.
It probably was pretty close to a
It
cube in
was
those
pretty
days.
close, 4-3. It probably weighed 300 pounds because my
Hmm.
parents had a 36-inch one. It took two people to get it up the stairs because it was massive. And the 5.1 surround sound system, when he got an HDTV, he put it in his living room along with a Yamaha soundbar. It's fine. And his
Hmm.
basement theater basically went unused, which is
Hmm.
sacrilege, sir. Thank God you found this podcast so you get your life back in order. Now good things will start happening to you. Now he's thinking about resurrecting that basement theater, but isn't sure if it's worth keeping the existing gear. The 36 tube is obviously not going to stick around. You might have to break into little bitty pieces and ship it out that way. I don't know how he's going to get it out of that
You can
basement.
always build a retro theater and have hipsters come over and talk about how cool it is.
You could hook it up to a Wii because that's about
That's
the
right.
resolution you can get out of it, anyways. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm still beating that Wii horse, aren't I? He has plans to go with a front projection setup, but he hasn't decided on a projector or a screen. His theater is around 18 by 11. 11 by 18. The room is a 24 foot overall, so
Yeah.
he's got some space that he's not 6 feet that he's using for a pool table, I bet. He needs a new subwoofer for sure. So what we recommend his gear is a Marantz SR880 Mark II AV receiver, 5.1 channels, 110 watts. Wow. 110 watts
One of those
times
ones.
3, 60 watts times 2, so the back channels are only
Yep.
getting 60 watts, which is, I remember when they used to do that.
That's right.
That
That's why
was-
they have the all equal power channels thing now is still a log line on the specification sheet, which
yeah.
it really doesn't need to be. It's not that much of a selling point, but that's why it still exists because this is the way it used to be.
So he's got Dolby Digital and DTS only, and of course there's no room correction because back then room correction wasn't something anybody thought about or exist. He's got the Boston Acoustics HD10 front speakers with worn-out foam driver surrounds that definitely need replacement at the very least. An Energy ECC1R center, a Paradigm end wall, CS160s as surround speakers mounted in the ceiling.
Yeah.
Well, you've got some Atmos speakers at least, so you've got that going. That's what I would do with those Paradigms to start with. I don't see anything about a sub in here, so I guess he doesn't have one. Is that?
No, he said he definitely needs a recommendation there. So,
Okay,
you know,
well.
11 by 24, because we're dealing with the entire size of the room there.
Yeah.
But that is still not a gigantic room by any
We're
means.
assuming it's probably no tall. It's a basement. It's no taller than 8 feet, right? So
So output is not your concern here.
No.
Yeah, it depends. He didn't give a clear budget. I mean, he's talking about he wants bang for his buck. He wants to be able to keep anything that he has if it's still worth keeping. So I'm assuming he's not going for mega dollar, purchases here, because if money were no object, he probably wouldn't be asking this question. So I mean, I would point you definitely take a look at those HSU offerings. If you want something that's under $500, I don't think you can do too much better than the STF2, but I would like to go to at least about a $500 level in this size of a room, just to get the extension and the output.
We're talking about subwoofers now. Okay.
Yeah, it's just subwoofers. Yeah. So, again, that Outlaw LFM1 Plus, it's still on sale right now with free shipping for $500. That would definitely have enough output and extension for that room. Pretty hard to beat that for that price. And then if you can pay more, then we recommend SVS, and hey, we recommend Power Sound Audio too.
Yeah. Just not as much as we recommend the rest of them. So HSU, these are the companies you're going to go look at. Outlaw Audio, this is for subwoofers. Outlaw Audio, HSU, SVS. Okay,
Really?
find something that's in your budget that looks like something you might be interested in, and if you can't decide between a couple of them, ask us again.
Yeah.
Okay. What you've got so far, there's no reason why you can't keep that Marantz. It's probably going to work. I would think about upgrading it pretty hard.
I would definitely think about upgrading it.
Get rid of those Boston Acoustics, because getting the foam, don't even.
Oh, it's funny. When you do a Google search on that model, the first thing that pops up isn't the speaker or the specs or anything like that. It's a foam replacement kit.
Yeah.
So this is not an unusual thing for these speakers, apparently. Lots of people are doing this.
I would take a look at Rob's list that we just talked about that we'll post. I would also look at the NHTs. I would take a hard look at the EMP techs, depending on which kind of speaker you want to use. I would check out, make sure those Paradigm, those are end walls,
yeah,
but they're mounted on the ceiling.
But they're mounted in the ceiling, yeah.
So I would consider using those for an Atmos speaker later on down the line. I wouldn't worry too much about that one right now.
Yeah, I kind of wonder about those a little bit, because in his email he mentioned those as being in the back, like being rear speakers. So I suspect that this might have been one of those setups where when we said, when surround was early, a lot of people assumed those aren't to your sides, they're behind you somewhere.
Behind you.
So if you don't have any speakers that are to your sides, this is a great opportunity to rectify that. And then you could probably use those in ceilings as your surround back speakers just fine. They'd
could be. Yeah. You're going to want to go to accessories, Tim. You're going to want to go to accessories for less. You want to go look at receivers there. Denon is the kind of go-to brand for me. Denon and Marantz in Yamaha, they're all there. Akio's there as well. You could go look for all those. You're going to think about room correction for sure. Number of channels, that sort of thing should be on your mind.
For me, the big thing is that he has no way of playing back True HD or DTS HD Master Audio right now, and
that is a problem. That is where it's where, like, for me, you're looking at HDMI basically. You you need to think about upgrading to that. But on accessories for less, you can also look at speakers. So you may be looking at the KEF speakers and the other stuff that they have there too, and just get an idea of what you can get there versus some of these other brands that we're talking about. The ones I would definitely, the EMP techs are a pretty easy recommendation for me. The other, budget-wise, it's really hard for me to get away from EMP. When I look at these other speakers, the Aperion Audios are pretty good looking as well. Like, for me, the way to get people who are not into audio, and I'm not saying that Tim isn't, but I'm saying that maybe people that Tim lives with might not be as much into this, is to have a really beautiful speaker. And when you look at some of these ugly black boxes with big horns in the front, people are like, ugh. But you see something from EMP Tech, you're like, oh, You know,
Hmm.
and suddenly it becomes something that people want to talk about. Look at the the cylinder speakers from SVS too. I would take a
Right.
look at those as well.
Yeah. So I
Uh,
mean, I think we got him covered there on a subwoofer for sure. I would recommend that it's time to get a new receiver for this setup. But yeah, the speakers, I wouldn't say you have to replace those. If budget is tight, he didn't say it was right tight, but if budget is tight, I wouldn't say you have to. You can definitely get foam replacement kits for those speakers. It is obvious that those are available, and a lot of people are looking for them. So yeah, I wouldn't say you have to, but if you have the budget and you want to, then I would certainly agree with Tom on that front too.
I don't know, dude. If it were me, the first thing I would do is get new. I would get the sub and the new speakers.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the first thing I'd do, and then live with the old school,
Really?
receiver for a little
Mm.
bit. Yeah, because it's got 5 channels. It's got to have enough power to do
Yeah.
everything. It's got Dolby Digital and DTS, and he's going to see
Yeah.
a huge sonic benefit from getting. Well, first of all, a
Oh,
not
definitely.
not not a Yamaha sound bar and speakers that have foam surrounds. So right off the bat, he's going to see a huge difference, and then he can save up for a decent receiver where he can get the Atmos and everything else. And right now, you don't really want to buy an Atmos receiver because
Yeah.
nothing. First of all, there's nothing out, or that's only now coming out, which means it won't be accessories for less, anyways.
That's right.
And if that's something that you're really interested in, and the HDMI 2.0 and HDCP 2.2 stuff is a complete train wreck.
Yes, it
So
is.
there's really, honestly, I'm gonna pitch Gene. I almost did it today. I'll probably do it sometime tomorrow. I'm going to pitch Gene on 5 reasons why you should not buy a receiver right now. Article for Audioholics. I swear to God, I want to write this thing so bad. I'm like, do not buy a receiver. That's my
Yep.
recommendation. If
I've
you're going to
I've said it.
buy a receiver from last year. Do not
Yes.
buy this
Yeah.
year's receivers,
Yep.
because I'm sorry. There's just no reason. This Atmos thing. It's not that Atmos is a problem. I got no problems with Atmos.
Just needs a little bit more baking time.
Well, I think that
That
Atmos is coming
HDMI
out.
thing needs more
I
baking time.
think no, that's definitely true. But I think Atmos
Yeah.
is coming out. I think it's hamstrung right now. I think they have not fully implemented it. I think we're going to see in the next generation of Atmos receivers, we're going to see like lot more flexibility and a lot,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to sound a lot better. But more importantly, you buy an HDMI a receiver with HDMI inputs, and your 4K TV that you buy 2 years from now may not work with it, and you're going to
That's
be
right.
going, what the hell? And I'm going to be saying, I told you not to buy a receiver that year. So, yeah, they. Hey, I'm in this business. They tried to sell me an X4100, which is the new Denon
Sure.
receiver, and I
Yeah.
was like, no. I will take an X4000. Thank you very much, because I have no need for you to sell me something that is absolutely not going to do me any good later on down the line. So that's it. Uh, yeah, okay. If you would really want to make, if yeah, it really depends on what your particular priorities are. For me, I think sonic benefit wise, you're going to see more from getting new speakers than you are from repairing the ones that you have and getting a receiver. Okay, I think
Hmm.
you're going to notice more. You're going to be able to go, oh, this is amazing. Whereas, but if you really want the electronics, get the electronics. That's fine. I don't care. Whatever, dude. All right. We're getting long. How long are we on time now? An hour and 12 minutes. I'm so
Yep.
tired. How are we even close? We're not even close to the end of this train
We're more
wreck.
than halfway through.
All right, Cameron has noticed that what seems to be a contradiction in the way we're describing bass. We frequently said how bass is omnidirectional and not localizable, the way high frequencies are, and yet we've also frequently said how having a second subwoofer placed across the room from the first subwoofer makes both subwoofers disappear. In his own theater, he can certainly tell where the bass is coming from if he moves his one subwoofer to a different spot. So what is the deal?
Hmm.
Ah,
Yep. Fair question.
I think it's a fair question. Go on, Rob.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah. Yeah. When we're talking about omnidirectional, just to address that part first, that is the dispersion pattern that we're talking about there. So when we're talking about high frequencies and that, they tend to become more and more directional, especially if you're using a somewhat wider diameter driver to produce higher and higher frequencies. They get more and more directional as they get higher and higher. So that is a dispersion thing. The reason that bass sound waves are omnidirectional in their dispersion is because they're so wide and such long sound wavelengths that they, first of all, you're only hearing the reflected sound because the wavelength itself is longer than at least one of the dimensions of your room when you're talking about the deep bass, and also they just wrap around the actual cabinet of the subwoofer and come out the other side. So you can stand behind a subwoofer and the bass won't really sound any different versus when you're standing in front of it, whereas you can't really do that with most speakers. They will most definitely sound different in the high frequencies if you were to stand behind them. As for the localizability, now, I mean, he mentioned this himself in his own email. He's like, is that mostly the higher frequencies? And it's important to make the distinction that, once you get down to 60 hertz and below, you're starting to talk about sound wavelengths that are longer than 8 feet, which means that they're probably longer than the height of your room. And then you start getting lower than that, and they're easily going to be longer than any, direction in your room, any dimension of your room. The subwoofer is still producing sounds all the way up to at least 160 hertz if we're talking about an 80 hertz crossover. And so stuff over 80 hertz, that is going to be localizable. And it's not as though the subwoofer isn't playing that stuff. It's just getting gradually quieter and quieter as it goes higher and higher. So yeah, in terms of if you were to set a brick wall filter at say about 60 hertz instead, you would have a heck of a time localizing that. If it only played up to 60 and then just completely cut off. But because it is rolling off and playing higher, yeah, it's still localizable, and that's why the second subwoofer helps so much, in addition to evening out all of those horrible bass modes and nodes that happen in your room, because the sound waves are longer than the dimensions of your room once you go lower in frequency. So
that's one of the reasons why when you have a subwoofer really close to you, it's a lot easier to localize it. You're like, oh, well, maybe I'm feeling the wind off of it or something, or I know it's there. When you have it pushed further away from you, it's much harder to localize it. Well, that's because those higher frequencies that are being played softer and softer as they go above the crossover point, they are just further away and they're harder to hear, and that's what it kind of comes down to. So yeah, and having that second subwoofer in there just balances all that stuff out and gives you your two different places to hear it from, and that makes your brain think it's coming from everywhere. So that's just the way psychoacoustics work. Cameron also has a large metal antenna, TV antenna in his attic. It's not powered in any way, and reception is a bit spotty for certain channels. He doesn't want to replace the antenna, but he'd like a better option. He's seen antenna amps and signal boosters on Amazon. Would these help in any way? Can't say for sure, but if you're getting something, a signal booster or an antenna amp has the potential to help. That's the thing to remember. If you're getting nothing and you buy an amp, maybe.
Yeah, it's tricky because we've transitioned now. It's now digital television signals, not analog. When we were dealing with analog, sometimes you would get like a staticky, snowy image, or you get one of those double images where it looks kind of ghosty and stuff like that. With digital, we don't get that anymore. It's like it's going along fine, and then it cuts out, or it goes all pixelated and macro blocky, or something like that. If it's like spotty reception, which is what he said, it's generally working, but it just sort of goes on the fritz a little bit now and then. That's where a signal booster, antenna amplifier, it should help you there. But if it's more a matter of you're only getting a garbled signal to begin with, then amplifying that, you're just amplifying a garbled signal. It's not clearing up the signal, it's just amplifying what it's getting. So yeah, it would be nice to be able to say it's going to be 100%, but hopefully with that description you can sort of decide whether it's the right thing to do or not.
Cameron, you can almost like go locally to some place that's got a return policy and buy something that's cheap just to try it. And if it makes a difference, however small, and you want to buy something more expensive, we'll return it, and then there's no reason you can't do that. It's kind of what these things are for. I mean, it feels a little sketchy to do that, but that's probably what I would do. I'd probably go try to find something cheap that works, that might work, see if it makes any difference. If it does, then I'd be on Amazon or someplace else, or maybe go back to the same store and say, I want something more powerful because now I know something, it's going to work.
Right.
Jeff has a dedicated 16 by 20 theater. He has acoustically treated, including floor-to-ceiling corner traps. Yay! He recently bought a Denon AVR X4000, same one I bought. Good choice. He bought it from Accessories for Less. Good choice, great price, and now he's thinking about improving his bass. He's already done a bunch. He's acoustically treated this room,
Hmm.
and he's got the Denon receiver with the highest level of Odyssey.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's he's well on his way. He has one of the older, huge SVS PB meaning ported box,
Hmm.
12 plus 2 plus slash 2. That means it has a 12-inch driver, the plus driver, but slash 2 means it's got two of those bad boys. So this thing's
Yeah.
probably the size of a coffee table, a large coffee table, not a small one, like a massive one. That's currently located on his front wall next to his center speaker. Okay.
Yep.
He could move it to the right side wall near the front, and he has a spot on the left side wall near the back where a second subwoofer could go. He's wondering if he should keep his gigantic PB12 plus 2 and add a second different subwoofer, or should he sell his PB12 plus 2 and buy two new identical subwoofers? One thought is that if he were to buy cylinder subwoofers, their small footprint would allow him to place them very near the midpoints of both the sidewalls. So what should he do? And if he keeps his existing subwoofer, what currently available sub would make for a good sonic match? Sonically matching subwoofers is not a thing you need to worry about generally, Jeff. You're wanting to match output, not output, but depth, and raw ability to pressurize your room. The fact of the matter is that you bought a subwoofer that can pressurize your room, my room, Rob's room, and about five other home theaters all together at the same time. Because that thing right there, I'm surprised you still have doors on your home theater, which is fantastic. You bought a sub that you will be able to die with if you would like to. I mean, you could probably get buried in it, to be honest with you. You might have to bend you a little bit to get you in there. But you could take the drivers out and some of the bracing, and I think they could probably fit you in. This is a massive, massive, far more powerful sub than you actually need. Is that a bad thing? No. It just means that you're not having to turn it very loud in order to have it pressurize your room. What other sub could you place with that? Any other sub that we recommend on this podcast, barring some of the really entry-level ones. Any of the SVS subs, the HSU ones. I probably how low is that Outlaw hit? Does it hit pretty low?
If it's the LFM1 Plus, it goes right down to 20.
Well,
And
then
they have,
you could do that
yeah,
one as well. Any of those subs you could pretty much work with. It's the S one that I'm thinking of that only goes down to like what 25 or something like
that's
that.
right, yeah.
Yeah, I'd stay away from anything that doesn't hit to 20.
Yeah.
But any of these subs that we recommend would work with that. So if that's what you're worried about, should you sell it and get the smaller ones? Yeah, sure, you can do that too. These are all good options, man. You got first world problems if I've ever heard them. If it were me,
Hmm.
it's really hard for me to say that I would want to give up that massive sub because there's some part in the back of my mind that would say maybe someday I'll have a room big enough to justify this massive subwoofer. But I think I would wonder what kind of money you could get for it. If you could
Right.
sell it and get enough to buy a subwoofer and a half,
Hmm.
like a cylinder sub and a half, it would be hard for me to pass that up. So, or anything more than that, anything above that level of output. I mean, I think the entry level SVS subs would have, if you had two of them, would have no problems pressurizing that. 60 by 20, dude. My lord, I can't even believe that your drywall is still hanging on your wall with this thing. You could really do some
Yeah, it's not a
damage.
tiny room, but yeah, you don't need the twin drivers for that one. Yeah, I mean, I do, you know, hey, it's someone else's money, so I might as well say what I would do in an ideal world. I do like the idea that if there is a solution that would let you use the midpoints of the two side walls, we talk about diagonally opposite corners. It's certainly preferable to having both, two subwoofers, both of them on one wall together. But midpoints of two opposing walls is even better. It is even better than diagonally opposite corners. So if there's a solution that lets you do that, I gotta say it's not for nothing, right? That you are getting some benefit from that. So I kind of lean that way, but that's because it's not my money. This
Yeah.
is this is your money, and I don't know how much you'd get selling the Gigantoid BB12 Plus slash
I gotta
two.
believe it. That there's people out there that would just are
Uh huh.
slavering over the fact that they could maybe get hands on one of these because they don't make stuff like this anymore. SBS is
Well,
like,
Power Sound Audio does, except the two 15-inch drivers, not two 12s.
yeah, because 12s are for wussies. All right. How much time do we have left? All right. Jay asked, why do amplifiers even list both an 8 ohm output and a 4 ohm output? Speaker impedance is not consistent at all. Frequencies and Ohm's law dictates how much power will actually flow through a given impedance. So is it mostly just marketing? It's not mostly just marketing. I wouldn't say that. I mean, part of it is one thing is that when they list it into 4 ohms, they're telling you that it is been rated into 4 ohms, so that if you have 4 ohm speakers, you now know that this amplifier is steady into 4 ohms or rated into 4 ohms. Parasound put out a distribution amp that I just did a preview for, and it is stable into 2 ohms. I mean, that is just insane for a distribution amp. And it's a 12-channel amp, and they have dual speaker, like 2 sets of speaker terminals. They're like the Phoenix style, those little green plug-in things. They suck. But you could plug 2 speakers into each amplifier channel. You could theoretically put 24 speakers into this distribution amp, which is pretty cool, right? And it's stable to 2 ohms, so you could put 2 4 ohm speakers on each channel if you wanted to, which is not something you should do, but you could. And not only that, you could run it like, I think you can run it bridged or something as well, like 2 channels bridged, and so you could actually put like 100 and something watts into one channel and turn it into a 6-channel amp. It's the most versatile distribution amp I've ever really seen. You could use it for your home theater. You could use it for your Atmos speakers. You could use it to distribute 24 speakers throughout your house. It's a pretty cool amplifier. So why do they do this? Well, the other thing that you kind of, and they cheat sometimes, but if they're being honest, you can actually see if they're being honest with their ratings, how efficient the amp really is. If they say that the amp is 100 watts into 8 ohms and 160 watts into 4 ohms, well, it should be 200 watts into 4 ohms. It should double.
Theoretically, yep.
If it was perfect. But you know that there's something being lost to heat, most likely, as it's trying to power those lower ohm speakers. So that's another thing. That's another reason why you can look at these things. So a lot of times, what they'll do, unfortunately, is they'll say, okay, well, we'll only rate the amplifier 80 watts into 8 ohms, so that when we say it's 4 ohms at 160, it looks like it's a doubling. But they shouldn't do that.
Yeah, hopefully they're keeping the other metrics, such as harmonic distortion and noise. They should be keeping all of those things the same. You want to be comparing just the difference between what happens when it goes into a lower impedance. So yeah, that isn't completely useless information, and you'll certainly notice, as long as they're keeping those other metrics the same, that something like an AV receiver, it definitely doesn't come close to doubling its power into a 4 ohm load. As compared to an 8 ohm load, whereas some more expensive, larger, more robust external amplifier might. So it is somewhat useful. It is partially marketing, but I think more than that, people want to see it. But there'd be a lot of people who would complain if they didn't post that rating, because people want to see it so they can make that sort of comparison to see what it's doing. What happens when the impedance is lower? Does it double, or does it come close to doing so? So yeah, there's a little bit of that too.
Yeah, a little bit of that. It's the same reason why we have all these specifications on receivers, that no one knows what what is this? I'm like, oh, no one knows. But we used to not have it, so at one point they started claiming that they had it, and now that they have it, they claim that they can never not claim it.
Copied and pasted ever since.
Yep. So Dan is shopping for a new TV. He's a bit wary of listening to most reviews. He feels like Consumer Reports is fairly trustworthy and unbiased. We'd like to know if we recommend any TV review sites that we think are reliable. I don't really look at specific sites and say this site is reliable. I read reviews, and as I'm reading through the review, I'm thinking about how they're saying what they're saying, and what sort of tests they did, and trying to figure out whether or not this person is a hobbyist, is an enthusiast, has any idea whatsoever what they're doing, and then go from there. That being said, when Clint used to do a lot of our reviews on Audioholics, his reviews were fantastic for video. I used to do video reviews as well. I haven't done very many recently. Uh, one of the things we always did is we put through the calibration test and tried to see how close we could get to a true calibration. Because some TVs just can't be calibrated. And not only that, we let you know out of the box how well calibrated it was and what modes we use in order to get the best out of the box calibration. That sort of information is invaluable. So if you got somebody who's talking about that versus how well the Netflix streams on it or something, well,
Right.
that should tell you right there what kind of person the reviewer is and what kind of test what are they worried about. Are they spending a bunch of time talking about how ergonomic the remote is, or how pretty the bezel is, or how the stand is too silvery or something? I don't know. You got to go through stuff like that. I read CNET. I used to subscribe to Consumer Reports. I've got no problems with them. Whenever I say Consumer Reports, people get mad. Whenever I don't say negative things about it, because they're like, they recommend Bose. I'm like, you know what? They buy all their own stuff. They buy the most mass market stuff that's out there in order to make sure, because that's what their readers
Yeah.
are interested in. And yeah, compared to the rest of the garbage that's out there, Bose pretty good when that's what you're buying. When your options are they test 3 Bose systems, something from Cambridge Audio, and some no-name brand I've never heard of, because that's what was on the shelves at Best Buy that day. Fine. What? This is my example about Consumer Reports. I bought the top-rated drill from Consumer Reports. If I had known a bunch of really high-end tool guys, because I know a lot of high-end tool guys now, they would never have suggested this drill. But I have it, and it has never let me down, and every person who's ever used it has loved it. Would it have been the recommendation of the enthusiast? No. Was it a decent drill? Yes. That's why I say you can go ahead and trust a lot of what they say, except for the Bose stuff. You should ignore that.
Yes. Well, I like CNET. I would go with their reviews probably over anyone else. David Katzenmeier, his opinions of what makes a TV good or bad line up pretty much perfectly with my own, so that works. Ty Pendlebury also does good reviews for them too, so I like them probably the most. I like HD Guru. HD Guru often sort of goes with like the highest end stuff, so that might not be what everybody's looking for, because he likes to focus on sort of the cutting edge stuff. But I do like definitely their reviews as well. Consumer Reports, for me, the one downside I see is that they place a lot of emphasis on reliability. The reputation of the brand's reliability, how many complaints that brand gets, how many returns that brand gets. They place quite a bit of emphasis on that, and that's one reason why over at CNET right now, the highest rated LCD TVs are from Vizio, and at Consumer Reports, they're quite far down the list. And that isn't a picture quality thing or a features thing. It's a Vizio still has more returns, but they're also still selling like really, really cheap TVs that do have reliability problems, and it ends up hurting the brand as a whole.
Yeah.
So I'm not a huge fan of sort of punishing what might be a really good individual model because the brand overall, had some problems in the past, and they're continuing on with that. But yeah, in terms of what I might recommend, because he's sort of looking at these reviews, and he has some criteria. He's looking for like a 50-inch size to begin with, and he wants to have at least 3 HDMI inputs, because I guess he's not using an AV receiver, so he's just plugging his sources directly into his TV, and he has at least 3 HDMIs.
Yeah.
And he doesn't care about 3D, and he doesn't care about smart TV, and he's a little bit upset that it sort of looks like he's going to end up having to quote unquote pay for those features no matter what. It kind of, I mean, you want to get the best image quality for the price you're looking for. If it happens to also come with smart TV features in 3D, I wouldn't go looking for one that doesn't, because I wouldn't sacrifice picture quality just to get rid of those features. and it's
Yeah.
probably not going to lower the price all that much anyway. So, yeah, I mean, Consumer Reports, they're going to be recommending, probably Samsung most highly. And I have zero problem with that recommendation. But, like over at CNET right now, highest rated ones are the Vizio E and M series. Those are their newest ones. They're brand new ones that have full array LED backlights and even some local dimming in those. The M series is really nice. They do not have 3D. Yay, you're not paying for 3D with Vizio. They do have smart TV features though, so not really much getting away from that. But yeah, I like the Vizios myself.
You
I'd
can
probably
actually
get one of
just
those.
look at the Vizio when they put out new TVs, or they talk about they'll have like 7, 8, 9 SKUs per size,
Yeah,
which is insane if you think
not so
about it.
much anymore though. Now they've shrunk down their lineup for this year.
Yeah, but they still had like quite. I was looking at the SKUs for this last release that they had, and
Hmm.
there's a lot. And I think
Oh
some
yeah,
of it's for tracking purposes. They know that the
yeah,
ones that have like an F at the end went from one chain store and the other. You know what I mean? So that way that they can keep track of where things are getting sold from. But they are also selling first of all, a much larger number of TVs than a lot of other people, and they have a large, number of different quality levels, and you just run into a lot of problems that way. I am a Samsung guy. I like Samsung. I've never had any problems with Samsung TVs. If you can find a Samsung Plasma anywhere, grab it quick
that's
before
right.
they go away because those are amazing. You won't have to worry about any of these other things that you're worrying about because they won't be on there because they'll be older. But uh, my parents have a
Well,
Samsung Plasma, and it's
the F
just
series still
amazing.
had the F series still had 3D and some smart TV features, so
Oh, really?
those things were in there.
Yeah. So the higher end Vizios I'm okay with, and Samsung. My custom install guys that I've always talked to, they will tell you that they love Sony, and they
Hmm.
do love Sony, and Sony does give you great image quality, and Sony does have a lot of great features. Sony also costs a lot of money. You're paying a lot for that brand
Not
as
so
well.
much. They've tried to be a little bit more price parity these
Yeah,
days.
whatever. Pretty soon, dude, you're going to be paying for 4K whether you like it or not, too. So if you want to
Hmm.
get something before the 4K comes out, you might as well do it now. So that's our recommendations, which was this third question. We're down to two last people. How long
We
is
can do
this
it.
podcast? Jeez,
We can do it.
I'm so tired. Michael got a new Bell Fiber. Is that supposed to be fiber or five?
It's just fibe, of course. They have to trademark these things, so it's hard to
Really?
trademark the word fiber. You can trademark the
Got a
word
new Bell
fibe.
5 DVR setup with a Motorola VIP 1232, whatever,
Yeah,
and the
1232.
VIP 1200 for a second TV. I guess these are, what are those, DVRs?
Yeah, the first one is the DVR. The second one is like the box that connects to that DVR for your second room. This is so
But
you
he's
can
got
have.
two. Wait, he's got the.
Yeah,
Okay, so he's got the first one is the DVR, and
that's
the
right.
second one, the 1200, is for the second TV.
Yeah.
Okay. He's been having some issues with the screen going black and no signal being output from the DVR. Doing a full power down and boot up means a 10-minute wait before everything is functioning again. And when he's booting things back up, an error message says change source resolution often shows up. What the heck is going on, and what should he do about it? Oh,
Yeah. So
okay, dude. Let me tell you something. It's called a DVR. It doesn't. The cable box my parents are using here does not have DVR functions, but it's still called a DVR. Every fifth time I turn it on, it won't handshake. Okay, it's
mm,
HTTP. It just flat out I get static. And sometimes I'm like, whatever, I'll just leave it, and I walk away and come back and it'll be on. And sometimes I won't, and I'll have to power it down and power it back on, and it comes back, or I'll unplug the HDMI cable and plug it back in. Pain in the ass. But I go through the same thing you do. Every time the power fluctuates around here, that thing shuts off, and 10 minutes is fast for this thing. I could get a sandwich and eat lunch and you know be bulimic and do it all again if I really wanted to, because it takes forever for this thing to power back up. It gets a Cisco message up there. It has to download app stuff and all sorts of
yeah.
nonsense. It's a real mess. Uh, yeah, that change source resolution is
Mm,
uh, is probably all in line with this exact same thing, which is just this, you're not getting a proper handshake. And it might be timing out, which might be part of the problem. It sounds like uh, it's going black, and then I bet it flickers too. It flickers at him a little, like it's trying to come on, and then it just kind of goes. My PlayStation 3 used to do that a lot too. So
Well, yeah, in terms of, my experience, and I looked up, I Googled for some of these problems, and this is widespread. You are not alone at all, Michael. Lots of people are having this is very similar problems with these DVRs. So sort of the rule of thumb is this is a pain and a half to have to do things this way. But some of these they have an external hard drive as well. What you generally need to do when you are cycling the power for whatever reason is you kind of need to disconnect everything.
ugh.
Disconnect that HDMI cable, disconnect that external hard drive, and let the PVR, let the DVR cycle up. And so, it's unplugged. You've unplugged everything else. You plug back in the DVR, and you let it cycle up because it has to download all its information again. It has to re-download the guide. It has to download all the menus and all that stuff. That's
Uh,
a day. You have to leave all that. Leave it alone. Let it go for like half an hour. Let it do all its stuff. Then plug in your hard drive. Then plug in your HDMI cable. One of the problems is that if you've left the HDMI cable connected and your TV turned on, it's going through your AV receiver, it's trying to do these handshakes before it's downloaded all its software again. So, and that is a problem. So you kind of have to let it do its thing, leave it alone, don't have anything else connected to it, and then connect it back in. They're temperamental. So I wish I had better news for you, but that's about all you can really do in
so
these things.
after that, what happens? Then
Well,
it'll
after
be
that,
fixed.
yeah, I mean the DVR itself should at least have been sort of stabilized, and then it's able to make that handshake. You don't get this error message
But
that's
every
saying
time,
no
so that
change.
that's what the error message is. You're
Yeah,
saying that'll fix
yeah,
the error message, but the handshake issue is probably an order of operation things. That's usually what
yeah,
ends up
yeah.
happening is that you're not turning things on in the proper order. And I can't tell you because I've never used this particular setup and I don't know what the rest of his gear is, but I can't tell you what the order is, but I know when I was in Jacksonville, my cable box, my DVR, I can't remember what the order was, but I knew that if I turned on like the TV last or first or something, it was
Mm-hmm.
like everything would go to crap, and I'd have to
Mm-hmm.
power cycle everything. And so yeah, this is not. Yeah, you need to kind of figure it out. And if you've got a universal remote, or you have, you just remember, once you get it to power up in a certain way, that's what you want to do. You always want to power up in that certain way where you don't end up having these handshake issues.
Yeah.
You just have to kind of figure out what that
But
order
lots of
is.
people have been reporting with this particular box, they're getting audio dropouts, they're getting sporadic video dropouts sometimes, and people are like, is it the box, is it the signal, is it my TV, is it my receiver? It's not your TV, it's not your receiver. This is part of the problem with, it's the combination of the service and the box.
Yeah.
This is the service provider's problem. So, yeah, it's unfortunate, but you're
Call them up,
definitely
dude.
not
Complain.
alone.
See if they got a
Yes,
different box
exactly.
for you.
Yeah.
Tell them what's happening and that you're not going to stand for it anymore. You're not missing one more episode of Breaking Bad or no, that's over.
Well, that's off the air
Walking
now.
Dead, something like that.
That's
All right,
true.
Leighton is loving his bass now that he has positioned one subwoofer in the far left right corner and a second subwoofer for the left rear corner. He wants to know if adding a third subwoofer will help even further. He's thinking of having a subwoofer beside each front tower and then a third subwoofer in the rear left corner. Don't do that.
Nope, not good.
No, no. Why? Well, frankly, why do you? Yeah, dude, don't do that. The whole thing is that you're wanting to these opposing subwoofers are working together to make even bass response. You put another one in there, you now need
And
to
it's
get a fourth. Okay,
that's right.
so so the subwoofers are not bought in odd numbers. You need to buy them in even numbers so that you can position them across from each other in the room. So no, a third subwoofer will not make things evener. It will make things less even. So no.
Yeah, I linked to that Harman white paper PDF a couple of weeks ago. So right in there, they tried that out. They tried that out simulating it in a computer, and they tried it in the real world using three subwoofers instead. Because hey, if two subwoofers is good, maybe three is even better. Nope. Nope, made things worse until they went to four subwoofers, and
And they
then
got
that
better
kind of phased
again.
back out again. Yeah.
There you go.
So now there was a proposal a number of years ago for also trying to even things out vertically. So using a third subwoofer that was elevated in some fashion so that it could try and even out the vertical room modes and reflections, that didn't catch on so much since usually it ended up needing to be like equidistant from both of the two subwoofers that were on the
On the
floor, meaning
ceiling.
it's kind of directly over your head, maybe. Yeah. Now we talked about stealing subwoofers earlier, or at least Tom did, while I was distracted with other things. Yeah, that still probably isn't going to catch on,
Let me
especially if
ask
you're
you a
doing
question. Do you really need your
480p.
base to be evened out vertically? Are there people who are sitting so much higher that they're having different subwoofer experiences? No? Step away from the third subwoofer, sir. All right. His second and last question is, he has the Empyrean Varus Grand speakers. Good choice. I like those. And he
Mm-hmm.
knows someone who's interested in buying them from him. He's considering the Ascend Acoustic Towers with the raw ribbon upgrade. But would they be any improvement over his Varus Grand speakers? Remember I said at the beginning of this podcast, we're going to talk about this at the end of the podcast? Here it is.
Mm-hmm.
In your room, okay, could they sound better? Yes. Will they sound better? I don't know. Even if they do sound better, will they sound better enough for you to think that this was a good idea? I don't know, and I can't know, and you can't either without having the opportunity to A/B them. So, what is Ascend Acoustics' return policy there, Rob? They don't have one of those free
It
ins.
is. It is not free shipping. You have to pay for shipping to you, and you have to pay for the return shipping. Now it is a slightly discounted rate because they got the corporate rate there. But yeah, you do have to pay the shipping both ways. Now you get a full refund on the purchase price, but you'd be out shipping if you wanted to bring in a pair. Or I mean, one thing you could do is bring in just the center. Right? You could try that out and see if it really improves your dialogue clarity, and then it doesn't have a great timbre match across the front three anymore, then I'm just talking strictly about shipping, right? Because then you're only talking about shipping
Yeah.
one speaker instead of a pair. That might be one way to come at it. Or if you were also going to upgrade to the surrounds and you were going to use bookshelf surrounds, you could bring in a pair of the Sierra 2, which are a lot cheaper to ship than
Yeah.
the towers.
I would go with that before I would go with just a center. That sounds weird.
Yeah.
I would go with bookshelves and do an A/B with the bookshelves. This is the thing, Leighton. If you're going to do this, don't tell the guy who wants to buy the Varus ground speakers that you're doing it, because he might want to come hear it and go, "No, I like those other ones better," just like you do. So I'm not buying your crappy Varus Grand anymore. I'm going to go get the ones that you want. Yeah. So that if you can't afford the shipping or whatever, just know that chances are, if you're going to have the same sort of experience that we talked about at the very beginning of the podcast, yes, you may prefer one over the other,
Mm-hmm.
but the differences are unlikely to be night and day. It's not going to be this like thing. It's going to be more of a, it's a little clearer. I'm finding that I'm a little bit more engaged with this. I'm kind of liking this one. That the imaging is a little bit better. I feel it's like a little three-dimensional. It's not going to be that one's a Ferrari, this other one's a VW Bug. That's not going to be the difference
Yeah,
you're going to hear here.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, my experience with the RAL ribbon tweeters is that, I mean, on a purely technical,
Yeah.
measuring this objectively level, they can do some things that a dome tweeter can't. They're so light, they're a hundredth of a gram, and the transient response on them just objectively is faster. Now, how much of an audible difference that's going to make to you, I mean, very debatable. Like, I've been really impressed with them because I think they bring that sense of realism to the sound, that being able to fool you that that's a real live person or a real live instrument in your room. That happens more frequently for me with that. Is that worth it? Very well might be. So, this isn't a situation where I'd say absolutely not, because I do think there's a possibility you'd
Yeah.
prefer them. That there's an objective reason that you might. But yeah, it's certainly not night and day.
But then again, in your room, it could very well be that ribbon tweeter upgrade that is giving Rob this experience that he really prefers,
Mhm.
in some way reacts or interacts with your room in such a way as to make it less enjoyable for you, or
It's a little
your
unlikely because usually less
usually.
excess sound isn't a problem. But some people don't like the fact that it actually, in many ways, sounds quieter because there is less excess sound. That happens with upgrading to an actual good subwoofer too. A lot of times they're like, where did all my rumbly excessive
Where did all that
reverberant
farting
bass go?
sound go
That's right,
that
yeah.
used to be in the air?
So I would say this is a case where it's worth an audition.
I think
I
so
think it's
too.
worth. Yeah.
And technically, I agree with Rob. Technically, the ribbon tweeter should be better than
Right.
the dome tweeter. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to think so. It just
Yeah.
should be. So that said, let us know what you decide. All right, we're done. If you want to contact us, you can go to the website www.avrant.com. Go there to comment, or if you want to email us one of your questions, please do so over at you can email Rob at avrant.com, Tom at avrant.com. Uh, Facebook.com/avrant podcast. Post any questions or pictures or anything like that over there. And then Twitter is at First Reflect for Rob or at avrant_Tom for me. Once again, I want to thank our listeners of the week, Niels and Todd, for donating to the podcast. That helps keep us going, and we really appreciate that. Look for our Chris Kirikakis interview from Odyssey coming out soon. And we'll see you guys next week. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
All right, the after party is going to start in just a few minutes, and I am not sticking around for it, so I'll see you guys in a little bit.